Good afternoon, Alan. Thank you for taking out time. I know you're a busy guy. Thank you very much. And for those of you wondering, how the hell did I manage to get Mr. Allan Leighton on the other side of the screen? Well, you've been into my neck of the woods, which is the Black Country, a few times because you're chair of the charity, the Canals and River Trust. Agreed? Yes?
Absolutely.
Yep. So I bumped into you both in Birmingham when you were doing the annual report and in Coventry recently, and I managed to bend your arm to agree to do a podcast.
The truth is you stalked me. You know that.
Well, I have seen you a number of times, so
Yeah.
I'm not going to digress from that. But look, for those who've never heard of you, which I doubt, let me just quickly go through a summary of what you've done and why I think you're such a brilliant person to interview. You started your commercial life in Mars, that's the bars, in Slough, where you were involved in sales. You moved on to Asda, where you were the chief exec. You negotiated the big deal with Walmart. You were previously chair of the Royal Mail. You were chair of lastminute.com, so you understand the internet and the new way of things. You've sat on the board of B Sky B, so you understand media. You've also, interestingly, sat on the board of Dyson, so you have an idea about manufacturing and the importance of branding. You're chair currently of Wagamama Pizza Express, so hospitality. You've been chair of Co-op, which had an interesting background, I'm sure, before you took over in 2015. And you've just been recently appointed chair of Brewdog. Have I got? And that's only
All bar one. I'm no longer the chair of Wagamama. We sold it to the restaurant group. But
okay.
But I was chair and very proud of it.
Fantastic, brilliant. Okay, so let's kick off then. Let's look at this extensive career of yours. You wanted to become a footballer, is the rumor I heard, and then you ended up in Mars. So from sport, how did you end up in Mars, and particularly sales?
The true story is I wanted to be a footballer and I broke my leg very badly when I was about 16. Broke it in 5 or 6 places, actually. And then if you broke it in 5 or 6 places, it was a long time off. So, and football, like all sport, is how fast you are over 5 yards. It's a 5-yard speed thing. And you're not the same player. So that was the end of that, really. But then I wanted to work somewhere. I'd heard about Mars. I went for an interview in Ipswich, actually, I always remember. And they asked me if I could come back the next day. And I said I couldn't because I'd come for that day, not the following day.
Yeah.
And so they said, OK, fine. And then 2 weeks later, they phoned me up and said, look, you really should come and talk to us. Come to Nottingham. And so that's how I went to Nottingham and I went into Mars and I was there for 18 brilliant years, actually.
Football, what position was that then?
Centre forward or centre half, depending on who else was available.
Well, you are quite tall, so I can see
that was a thing. Because I was tall, I could head it. So wherever you could head it, that's where you played.
Now, so you ended up at Mars. Now it was interesting. You said you learned when I read your book, you learned a hell of a lot at Mars. But in particular, you were also in a sales capacity. Do you think in this technologically driven tech new startup world, having a sales background helps, and generally being an entrepreneur, do you think a sales background helps?
Probably, but you're not really at Mars. You're not really taught to be a specific skill. In fact, when I was there, I worked in nearly every division actually, and I worked in manufacturing, worked in HR, worked in marketing. So what you're taught is to be a really good manager. You're taught to be really good with people, and Mars, they taught me. They said always remember, Alan, there's only 2 things that are important in business: people and product, in that order. And if you get the people and the product right, you needn't worry about anything else, and that's true. So they sort of, and I went through the organisation very quickly. I had a lot of responsibility when I was very young, because it didn't matter. Their whole thing was it's about experiences, not experience, and it's about the skills that you've got, not the skills that you don't have. So no, and it was I loved every minute of it, and didn't ever think I'd leave actually. Stayed there a long time. As you know, a lot of I then took a lot of my people from Mars to Asda with me, basically. People like Justin King, Richard Baker, Angela Spindler, Dave Cheesewright. They all came from Mars because although they didn't know anything about retail, they knew about people and products, and off we went. So no, it was a great time. The other thing they taught me was this is how many years ago now? It must be nearly 40 years ago, 38 years ago. They said to me, Alan, you only have to remember this one thing. It's all about getting more brains than anybody else. It's about brain count. It's not about head count. Get more brains. And they said, you have to remember 50% of the brains in the world are female, and brains have no color. And it's going to take people a long time to work that out, by which stage we'll have more brains than anybody else. Your job is get us brains. And remember, 50% of the brains in the world are female, brains have no color.
Wow.
What else do you need to know,
Yeah, insightful stuff. And that was, as you said, 40 odd years ago.
Absolutely. And
wondering,
people are still, can't work it out,
Yeah. And I'm wondering, I know we'll talk about it later, the Walmart thing, and I'm wondering whether that was the bit that you learned the American culture and you sort of clicked onto. Because was there much of an American culture at Mars?
Yeah, but there wasn't. I mean, it was a sort of, the management thinking at the time was very advanced, but therefore came from the US, because the UK was still very much in the backwoods from a management perspective. It was all about you served your time, you took the job, you served. Yeah. Mars was very different to that. But I've always had, I love the US. I've always loved the US, and as you know, I lived in Canada for a long time, running all the big supermarkets and bakeries up in North America. So but it was Mars was very you were your own person, but they were very focused on people and products, and that's how it worked.
And is that what you took then when you went to your next challenge? And it was a big challenge, because I remember when I was a small child walking past Asda, and either they were shut or they were empty, and you took over what was commonly known as a basket case. Asda. I mean, they were really on their knees. So when you walked in, how did you? I mean, that just sounds virtually impossible to do, but you did it. Well, what were the sort of first steps you did?
Well, to go back to people and product, do what you do. You look at this thing. In my career, I think there's not a single sector that I've not been involved in. And people say, well, how do you do that? I said, well, I don't have to, I only have to worry about people and they get the product right. So I don't need to be an expert in house building or restauranting or testing or any of these things. But the Mars, I mean, obviously, Archie was there. It was a big turnaround. I love the idea of doing a turnaround. And nobody gave us any chance. It's always in many ways, I love that when people say you haven't got a cat's chance in hell, and it took us a bit of time, but I have this thing, everything, the way we sort of think about things is if something worked once, it worked for a reason. And as there was, remember, it was the first superstore operator in the world. I mean, the team that built that up were way ahead of their time. And it was a phenomenal idea that you put non-food in with food, and you had these big places, and because you got the traffic, you sold the non-food. I mean, it was way ahead of its time. And then, like everything else, it gets carried away, and people forget what the roots of it. The roots of Asda was price. It was Asda price. That's what the whole thing was built up on. And they could be the lowest price because they did more volume per site than anybody else. And basically, we just went back to that. I have this thing about Back to the Future. Back to the Future with reality, and so that's what we did, and then we brought, we couldn't get any, but we had $1 billion of debt. We were about to break our banking covenants. We couldn't recruit anybody from the industry, and that actually worked to our benefit because nobody had come and work from us from any of the other big four. So we had to go and get people. So I went back to Mars, and I just got, the rest is history. I think that Asda group of spawned more CEOs than any company's ever done, and it was phenomenal. And it was hard, it's not every, it's easy to tell the story, but it was 10 years, and it took us 10 years to get to. Probably took us 4 years to get to where we wanted to be, and then we kept building on the back of that. We created the biggest clothing brand in Britain, George. I mean,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and then and then eventually, we decided the best thing to do. We needed to move on, basically. I've been really close to the Walmart family for a long time. I've been seeing them, been out in the US. They've been over to see us. I really loved what they did. In fact, I used to copy everything they did, but I would do it in a purist way. So I would copy it in a different way to they would do it. And when they decided to buy us, when we decided to get together, they said one of the reasons was they felt that we did some of the things they did better than them.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was a great, and I guess if we could have written the last chapter of our particular book, then that would have been, it would have been a good last chapter, because we thought it was a really good thing to do.
It was interesting because when I read Sam Walton's autobiography, he talked about going around other competitors and copying the bits that were good and making them really good. I also read somewhere you were quite intrigued by their culture. Some bits you thought, like singing the hymn and the anthem in the morning, probably wouldn't work. But
no, I love that. We did it. We did it. It was. I mean, so I knew Sam, and he said I got copy shamelessly from him. It was his thing. He had two things that we really took. The people we really listened to were Sam and Ken Morrison. They were the two doyens, basically. His other thing was one store at a time. He said to me, "Look, Allan, I never set out to have thousands of stores to be the biggest employer in America. I had one store, then I did another store, then did another store." And he had this thing about, always think about things one store at a time. Don't think about things as being 500 things, but we did that in a week. I mean, we were going to do a deal with Kingfisher. We were going to merge. It was going to be announced in 10 days' time. It had already been announced. It's going to be completed in 10 years' time. And I just felt that it was not, having been through, I just felt it wasn't the right thing to do. And it was a big call to suddenly say we're not going to do it. And so literally I phoned Rob Walton and said to him, "Rob, I think it would be great if you should be buying us. We should be with you. We shouldn't be doing this other deal." And he said, "Oh, Allan, how long have we got?" I said, "You've got 8 days." And then I was on a plane to Bentonville the next day, which I think was the Sunday. And they were on a plane back to Leeds on the Monday. And then they were back out on the plane on the Thursday. And then they called me on the Saturday and said they'd do the deal. And then we worked all day on the Sunday to do get everything done. And we announced it on the Monday morning.
Wow, that's extraordinary. Yeah. What about all this emphasis on due diligence, or did you?
Well, we did it all. We did it all, but we did it all. We wanted to do it, so I sat in the room for both parties, and there's a huge amount of trust in it. And
had to be.
Yeah, we did it, and it's amazing. It's the same thing I always say. It's amazing what you can get done when you need to get it done. Things don't have to take forever. That's a great example of it.
But that was also, though, I think, not typical, because simply the trust was so high between both parties. You were able to probably, I think, override any problems with accountants and lawyers.
Absolutely.
All the stuff they would have thrown at you. No. You would have said, no, just do it.
Yeah. And all the data say, that you can do, most of the due diligence is quite easy to do. Anyway, it was a hell of a story, really, but it was an amazing thing to do.
It was astonishing. So just picking up the Asda thing and just your views. Superstores or supermarkets are now heavily in the news. We've heard Asda has now been acquired by two entrepreneurs at Bradford. So first thing, I suppose it's difficult for you to say, but it's been overladen with debt. One, how do you feel about it going to private equity, and secondly, Morrison's is now being pursued by private equity. How do you feel about supermarkets? Do they benefit from private equity and that kind of sort of sharp thinking, the way they sort of bring in?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's all about ownership. I mean, in the end, the ownership's important. The most important thing is who runs it. That's where it tends to come from. I think that, Walmart did extremely well out of Asda, and that was at their time. I think they were thinking about a much bigger global business than there is today. So in many ways, it made sense for them to sell it. I like the fact, I quite like the idea it's an independent company again.
Okay.
The two entrepreneurs, but they're very good guys. Stewart Rose is, who I know really well, chairing it. It'll be different, but it's a fabulous business, and it still could be a fabulous business. I think it's laboured a bit in the last few years because it's not really been sure, what's its future, but now it's very clear what it is. Morrison's the same. Ken built a fabulous business there, and of course, remember, there are big synergy plays. These aren't just private equity buying supermarkets. They own petrol forecourts and all sorts of things, and therefore you've got this omnipresence, which gives you the convenience presence. So it's not, these people think they're sort of financial transactions. They're not.
That's right.
They're strategic transactions, and because you wouldn't just do it, just for the financial piece of it. So I think it'll be very interesting, and it's a unusual setting where two of the big three are going to be two of the big four going to be private equity owned. Two will be publicly owned. One's a partnership, Waitrose. One's a membership model, which is the co-op. So you've got all these different methods, all these different ownership models evolving, which frankly you're seeing not just in food industry, you see it everywhere. There's different evolution of ownership structures.
And just before we move on, and of course it's interesting to see the German discounters also in the mix, who also seem to have had a very good COVID. And just prior to COVID, they were really flying as well. So it's a very interesting dynamic, I think.
Yeah, it is. And remember that those German discounters aren't German; they're international. Aldi's been around the world for a long, long time. I can remember going to Texas, 30 years ago and seeing an Aldi. They are seriously good players, and that people think them as German discounters. They're some of the best international retailers in the world with the global footprint that works. That takes a bit of doing.
Now you spoke about right at the outset. Two things were key. You said people and product, and I remember when I used to wander into an Asda. Typically, there was always somebody around you could ask. I can't find this. I can't find that. I can't find this. But Amazon. Who I remember when I read Bezos's autobiography, he was gunning for Walmart. He was absolutely gunning for Walmart and said, I'm taking that food sector. And of course, in London, they're trailing these stores where you can walk in. You don't have to talk to a single soul. You can buy your stuff, walk in without talking to anyone. Is that the future? Is it so depersonalized?
No, I mean, but remember, online is very big. Online is here to stay. Digitalization of retail was prominent prior COVID. It's now even more significant, even in food. Amazon are they're the biggest retailer in Britain. They're bigger than anybody else already. And I've actually, remember that these they started off as they're going to do books online.
Yeah, that's right.
And everybody said, "Well, that'll never work." Well, here we are. So I wouldn't ever, I wouldn't ever doubt them in any way. I think they've demonstrated, and they've sort of led the way on that sort of online revolution. I think in food retail, the more will be delivered. Co-op, we've just opened pretty much a touchless store. I think it's very important in convenience. The other big thing is, which is why the co-op's doing really well, is convenience has come back. So next to having it delivered to your home, going just around the corner for it is the next best thing. So the whole markets, all these markets have changed significantly. But Amazon are, they're a proper professional bunch basically, and never doubt them, because I just remember selling books online, that will never work.
Yeah, interesting. So you've now taken on what's colloquially known as a portfolio role. I think even you, somebody said you came up with the term plural.
Going plural. Yeah, it is. Yeah, I invented. I own it actually. I trademark and register going plural. I was when I loved that after about a year with Walmart, and I loved them, and they really looked after me. They wanted me to go to the US. Probably I could have gone and run Walmart actually, probably. But I didn't really fancy it. I'd been 10 years, 11 years. I just fancied to do something different. And so I just said to them, not one day. I said, look, I'm going to pack in basically, and I'm just going to try and do something different. So I have no idea what I'm going to do. And so actually, when I resigned, and we announced it, I didn't have anything else to do. And so the journalists phoned me up because they'd all thought I'd been fired. And they said, well, you've been fired. I said, no. They said, well, you getting a payoff? I said, no, I don't like payoffs. And they said, well, you getting? I said, I'm not even getting a clock. I'm not getting anything. And they said, well, what are you going to do? And into my head from nowhere came this, I'm going to go plural. That's what I said. And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, I'm going to do lots of different things. And then now going plural stuck, and it's become, but my model is slightly different. I'm not, I'm sort of full time. I'm not, I don't do 2 days a week doing a few non-execs. And I was deputy chair at Selfridges for a time. I helped buy that with the Weston family, and Gordon Selfridge had this great phrase, which is, "There's no such fun as work." And for me, that's how I see work. I see work as fun. That's why I do it. And people say, well, are you ever going to stop? And I say, well, I hope not, because A, I think I'll die, and B, I just enjoy it. It doesn't mean it doesn't have its moments, but largely, I enjoy it.
So you walked into one basket case, which was Asda, and then you walked into, well, I suppose people said it was another basket case, which is Royal Mail. I mean, you're talking about an institution that's been around forever, where the unions have quite a role to play. It's I don't know if I want to use the word monopoly, but it had sort of, and of course, with digital and everything, competitors are starting to come in. So how did that differ from Asda, and how did you tackle a role like the Royal Mail?
Well, the interesting story was I was asked if I'd do the NHS, and I came up with some ideas for the NHS that people didn't, which actually if we'd have done them would have been phenomenal. But anyway, they felt it was politically very difficult. So they asked me if I'd chair the Royal Mail, which was then called Consignia, if you remember. They changed the name,
that's right.
and which seemed to me ridiculous. So anyway, I spent a bit of time on that. I mean, the Royal Mail, it is a phenomenal thing. I mean, it's it's one of the great, it's one of the great British traditions, and the fact that people get their mail delivered, up to twice a day is just unbelievable. And we had great, there are a lot of very good people, and the posties are much more than just postmen. They're part of the community. They look after people. It's a big deal. And the problem was, it's a monopoly. It had a 98% market share, but it had a 98. I never known anything that had a 98% market share and lost £1 million a day, which is what it did. And so it didn't seem to make much sense to me. So again, we spent a lot of time with the posties, and I gave them all. We gave them shares we created this for the false, and nobody thought they'd make any money, but they did. And I just shifted the whole focus of the organisation away from the centre to it's all about the posts, it's all about the delivery office, it's all about the mail centres. That's where it all counts. That's where we put effort in. And in fairness to the union CW, I got on brilliantly with them. we used to argue cat and dog, but they knew, in the end, we had to be a commercial entity. And that would be a good thing. It wouldn't be a bad thing. And I wasn't there to slay the unions. I was there to help to drive the and eventually we did, and we had a few battles, and we were actually, I think we're the only people ever to win a strike ballot. I think actually we won a strike ballot one. And because I said to everybody, we've got to stop doing this. When I went, I think 89% of all the strike days in Great Britain were the Royal Mail.
Wow.
It got into better shape. We turned it from losing £1 million a day to making £1 million a day. I got Adam in, Crows, to run it, with a very good, strong board. And then handed it over. I did it for 7 or 9. I did it longer than I was supposed to anyway. And then it got floated, and that's given it the wherewithal to be able to compete with all these other. And of course, what's been brilliant for the Royal Mail is actually online has been very good for it, because of the parcel business expanded. We can do it through the letter business. A lot of the parcels are letter size. So and the big thing is I changed the name back to the Royal Mail. When you've got the Queen's, we're the only people. I think we're the only people allowed to use the crown as our insignia. I mean, why would you ever want to? And it's been going since 1617 or something. So anyway, it was. I loved every minute. I loved the posters. I used to go out, see them all the time. If I was driving around, I'd see a poster, go and talk to them. And it was great. I loved it.
Interesting. You talked about talking to post people, the postman, the posties. So I meet a lot of chairs and a lot of non-execs. And where do you draw the line between being strategic and being operational? Because too often I hear CEOs turn around and say, "Bloody, they're too operational. This board is just too operational," and the chair just keeps meddling. So how do you? Because it's not scientific, is it? You've got to feel your.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so first of all, you can't be on the board of anything if you don't know how it works.
Yeah.
So, and if you want to find out how it works, you have to go, as I describe it, to the operators. So if you join the Royal Mail, you went. I learned this from James Dyson. When I joined the board of Dyson, everybody who joins Dyson, the very first thing they do when they walk through the door is make a Dyson vacuum cleaner, because then they know they're in the vacuum cleaner business. And I thought, smart. So in Asda, everybody walks on the checkout. In the Royal Mail, everybody, went with the posting. If you don't understand how it works, you can't govern it. That's my first thing. The second thing is the role of the chairman. The chairman only has one real role, and that is to get a great CEO. That's it. Because if you get a great CEO, everything takes care of itself. Great CEO gets a great team gets great results easy to govern, off you go. And so all my focus, and I've been very fortunate that actually I do have and have had some great CEOs. And then you let them run the business. And if you let them run the business, then your job becomes test and support. So how do you test? Well, one of the reasons I test is, I'm out, I go into the restaurants at Pizza Express, I go into the stores at the Co-op, and I talk to people and I feed it back up the line. I don't tell people what to do, but I'm a piece of radar. And if you've got that relationship with the CEO and the execs, then they actually take it as a piece of data as opposed to a piece of criticism. And and so that is the difference. You're there to get a great CEO. You're there to test and support. You have to understand the business. And then I describe myself. I'm sort of eyes on, hands off. So I don't miss very much, but I'm not out there doing it every day. And that's one of the reasons why I can do so many jobs, frankly, is because I've got great CEOs. I don't need to spend forever, checking and telling them what to do. It's all parts of the same thing: people and product. And people is from the postie to the chief exec. It's not a piece of people. It's all people. All the people you need to be on side.
So you spoke about your big job as a chairman is to find a CEO.
Yeah. No, a great CEO.
Great.
Not find a CEO, a great CEO.
A great CEO. So can you spot one, or do you have to get to know them really? I mean, are there some characteristics you think this guy, this girl, they're hot, they're good?
Yeah, I mean, you can. Sometimes you take, you've got somebody who's got all the skills, and it's their first job, and you help them through.
Yeah.
Being a CEO is the best job in the world. It's the loneliest job in the world, and it's the hardest job in the world. And nothing can prepare you for it. It's only when you do it do you realize it's the best job, the hardest job, the loneliest job. And it's always like that. It's incessant. And it's 24/7. Anybody who believes that you can't do this 24/7 every day of your life, even when you're on holiday, it's not true. It's always with you. You've always got that responsibility for everybody, in that organization. So you can see skills in people, you can bring them through, and you do that. And then obviously, you can pick people, and you know of their background, and you know of them. And a lot of it is how, when you talk to them, what do they talk about? Do they talk about themselves, or do they talk about people? Do they talk about themselves? Do they talk about product? The way, they got a sense of, all the great CEOs have got a tremendous sense of humor, because you have to have one. Otherwise, it's all too intense. They're really scared. And let me tell you, I'm very fortunate. Probably nearly half of certainly a third, must be kind of are women. I've got some great women CEOs, and they're really coming to the fore at the moment, because off the back of COVID, one of them said to me the other day that the skills you need today are to do with vulnerability, humility, and kindness. And actually, I think that absolutely they are. You'd never 5 years ago, 10 years ago, put on the skill base of CEOs humility, kindness, and vulnerability. But today, you need to have those things, and that's why for women, the women should be better CEOs than men at this moment in time, because they have those skills in abundance. Men not very good at those things, particularly vulnerability. Yeah. I think it's never been a greater time for women to become CEOs, and for women CEOs to really start to lead the way in what will be a new world, and is a new world post COVID, basically.
And from the way you speak, you keep mentioning people. So it's all about EQ, isn't it? It's all about, rather than the IQ, because traditionally, as you said right at the very outset, people are always recruited on IQ and qualifications and certificates. But you're saying throughout the whole interview, you've just been talking about EQ all the time. People.
It's, because most of us are in service businesses. Service comes from the heart, not a textbook. If somebody isn't sort of warm and bubbly, not bubbly, but warm and kind, and wants to talk to people, I learned, Mars was like that. But in Asda, 70,000 of my colleagues were women who worked on the checkout. They were the most important people in the business. They had the contact with the customer. In the Royal Mail, posties, most important people in the business. In my restaurants, waiters, waitresses, restaurant, they're that you have to remember. We don't do anything. I actually don't do anything. I can't actually do anything. So I can't. I'm not. You're dependent on other people, and therefore you have to treat them with respect. And my mum always used to say to me, she used to say to me, she said, "Allan, respect isn't something you earn; it's something you give. And if you give respect, all that, one day you may earn it. But all this thing, I go around, I earn respect. Not true. You give it. And if you give respect, eventually you might earn some."
With your vast business experience, by the way, I loved reading your book. This is fantastic.
I'm reading it.
And it's worth reading. It's called On Leadership, Practical Wisdom from the People Who Know. And you certainly know it. But one of the things that really captured me, and I'm thinking this because when you walk in as a chair or in any new business, you talked about, and there's a particular chapter about innovation or you die. And you said there should be, extraordinary comment, you said there should be, in any operation, about 10% of it should be chaotic. And if it's not, there's something wrong. Perhaps you can explain the chaos side of...
Yeah, you always need a bit of chaos, because out of chaos comes sometimes innovation. And the danger is that things, what people call settle down. Settle down is not a really good thing to have, and so there's so much constant churn in business, different things happening all the time. You have to have a bit of chaos, otherwise you don't learn anything. There's a great thing, when every business needs ugly ducklings. We've always had people who, just to drive us mad by saying, no, don't do that, do this, let's try this. And you think they're mad, but actually, if you don't have that, and actually, 2 out of 10 times they'd be right. And those 2 out of 10 times we never would have thought of. And so you're adding that to the core of what's right. So I think chaos and innovation and, spiking things up from time to time, I think it's good. I think it keeps everybody on their toes and brings new ideas to what's happening. So, I think a little bit of chaos is a good thing.
I think it's a great comment, because too often we hear businesses all the time being told, if you're going to scale or you're going to be doing certain things, it's all about procedures, and you mustn't aberrate, you mustn't move away from those procedures. It's all been documented, you can't do anything. But you're saying, oh, no, we need that bit of chaos, something that uncertain, that triggers, which I think I'm completely with you on.
Well, I think that's why a lot of the startups, they totally come from, and often they're chaotic. But from that chaos become really, good business, really clever ideas. And, people think about things completely different. What disruption means exactly that, disruption. You don't disrupt anything without chaos. Think about when we say, well, there's disruption on the motorway. What does that mean? It's bloody chaotic. There's disruption on the railway. What does that mean? Everything stops. It's a sort of, that's what it means.
With your vast experience in media, in tech, in manufacturing, we've just gone through COVID. You've talked about the new sort of makeup of future leaders on humility and vulnerability. What are your thoughts then? And you talk about innovation and chaos, and particularly around innovation, hybrid working. You've got a real established long history in working. Where are you on hybrid working and flexible working?
I think it's here to stay, and I don't think it's a bad thing. I think we learned, that COVID has been terrible in terms of people have lost their lives and the effects it had on families. And there are lots of people who've had it and recovered, but they were really ill during it. And then there's long COVID. So it's been a bad thing. But we've learned some things from it. So example, we don't have to meet to have this conversation, and it's fine. CEOs I know can talk to everybody in their organization down this route, which they've never been able to do before. They wouldn't even think about doing it. And I think hybrid working has been part of it. But I think people, work used to be a place, work used to be where somewhere you went. Now it's something you do. And therefore you can do it from certain places. And if you can do it from home, and sometimes you're more productive. Now, but that's not for everybody. It's interesting. I've had people coming back. I've been listening to people. Lots of people can't wait to come back. Lots of people don't want to come back. Most people are in the middle. They miss being with their friends, but they like the flexibility. But you've got to have a regime. I don't think you can just make your mind up. Because before it was very clear, everybody went to work. And so, right. My world, you have to say, you should try and come in these 2 days. If you're going to come in, the rest of your team will be there. There are these meetings you need to come to. These meetings you can do Zoom. These meetings you can do both. But I think it will develop. I think we're still at the very early doors on all of this, and it's going to take at least another 12 months, I would say, before it becomes clear, how this works. And therefore, you've got to be flexible with it. You've got to be agile. You've got to let these, let it find its own way. But in the end, we're gonna have to have some sort of regime for each company.
So that's the bit of chaos you're talking about. You need that bit of chaos to try and work out the best way forward.
We say exactly, and because for lots of people, they've only got one room in the house. I talked to somebody the other day, and she said, well, I've been at work nearly every day. So, throughout the whole thing. So, oh, that's good. What made you decide that? She said, well, actually, I've only got one room and the decorator's room. So, it's been hard for people. Let's tell you, it's all right for people who've got space, but for people who don't have space, it's tough. I think for young people, it's been hard, and there is no doubt that the nuances, the offside chats, they do have an impact on how you build your skill base and your personality and your mojo and all those things. But on the other hand, the 2-hour commutes there, 2-hour commutes back, that's high stress. So, I think I'm a big, I think hybrid working is the right thing. I think that it is the future. I think it's just going to take a bit of time to determine what exactly that looks like. And we've got to stay flexible with it. Don't make your mind up today, because it's not going to be like that in 12 months' time.
Just picking up your, it's interesting because people ask me this kind of questions, is you've just become recently chair of Brewdog. Yeah. And they haven't been around that long, if I remember. They haven't been around that long.
7 or 8 years.
Yeah. So maybe in your definition, a bit chaotic, because they're sort of like a startup. Now, you're very well regarded in the city. You're very well regarded in the industry. You must get approaches every minute of the day. Come and chair this, come and chair. How do you decide what to chair? Because people ask that question. How do you decide which company to go and become a non-exec or a chair of? What's your sort of criteria? I'm just intrigued.
I have 2 or 3 criteria. The number one thing is I've got to really like the people I'm going to work with. That is my number one criteria. Number 2 criteria is I think it's got to be capable of being something very special. And special doesn't necessarily mean big. It can mean big. It can mean make a big impact. And thirdly, I have to absolutely feel as if we're going to win. Because there's no point doing it without that. Yeah. And Brewdog's a great thing. Great business, built it from nothing. Fastest growing beer business in the world.
Yeah.
Lots of stuff on ESG. Really interesting characters running it. Very product focused. It's just they're my sort. I think and they're my sorts of businesses, and that wants to disrupt all the brewers. If you're looking at the Heineken's, Carlsberg, Budweiser, I know it's a Bud Miller. They've all been there for 100 years. This industry's never been disrupted, and it may be that Brewdog can do that, and that would be phenomenal.
And when you go into a role, sound like a PE guy here now. Do you say to yourself 5 years, and this is what I'm looking to achieve, and if I hit those bits, I'm off? Or do you go in with a completely free rein?
Free rein. I go in with the most important thing is create a great business. So create a great business that's got momentum and growth, and then you've got lots of opportunity. Opportunity comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes at all sorts of times, generally not in the shape or size you expected, and generally not in the time you expected. So there's no much point trying to define when that time is going to be. The most important thing is have a great business and just keep going and going and going. And whether it's in 6 months, 6 years, 16 years, or 6 hours, because you're a great business, something will happen,
And another question I get asked a lot is, Mr. A or Miss B will say, I want to become a non-exec. So one of your roles you said was to find a great CEO. And my assumption is you want a great board, so some great non-execs. And you must be heavily involved in the changing or bringing new people on. What do you look for in a non-exec to stay?
I'm very lucky. I have some great non-execs. Canal River Trust is a great example. Actually, trustees, and remember, they're all volunteers. They get paid. They get paid for this. the co-op board, I think, is the most diverse in the country. So, and I think it's in that word diverse that I really look for. You need diversity of people. You need different skills, different backgrounds, because it's the chemistry that works. You don't need everybody being an expert at one thing. So all of mine, I generally recruit for a character. They talk about people and products. Same way around. And then secondly, skill. But I might be looking for a supply chain person or an IT background person or something like that. That, and then you've got the right mix. Those boards are very difficult to chair, actually, because you want people with opinions. You don't want people who don't have an opinion, and actually you want different opinions, opposing. So actually that's quite difficult to manage opposing without making it confrontational. And but that's part of the not part of the skill of being the chair. One of great chairs have difficult boards, if you know what I mean.
Got it.
It's a sort of you don't want it. It's just not. I want to run it and go. What's been said today that's really made people bristle a little bit. That's the test, the bristle test.
A couple of questions before we wrap up. This has been fascinating. What have you learned about yourself or learned about other people because of COVID? Was there any? Did you see? Did you learn anything? Was there anything there?
Yeah, well, I think I did learn a lot, actually. I mean, first of all, I learned a huge amount about everything because everything changed in one day, and all the things. And you are either lucky or unlucky. You either had a business that remained open or a business that was shut. It was nothing to do with how well that business was doing or what a good job you were doing. So suddenly luck came into play in a way which I've never seen it. And then cash, which has always become, when I went to Harvard, they said, just remember one thing, never run out of cash. They said, if you just remember that, you'll be fine. But cash became a critical thing, and massive uncertainty, because you had no idea. You were doing things you'd never done before, so therefore you had no idea whether they were going to work or not. So you learn a lot about people in that too. How people responded in those under uncertainty, as opposed to certainty, was you learned a lot about people. But for me, it was a massive learning experience of, God, I've never had to do any of this before, and is this going to work? Are we going to survive? And in other businesses, you can imagine the co-op is a classic of the food stores are open, but I want to look after our people. And then we're the biggest funeral business in Britain, so we suddenly having to deal with all these. And I'm telling you, my people were unbelievable because there weren't anybody allowed to go. They were having to not only manage the funeral as they would do, but they were often the only people there. So you suddenly all these things come into play, and so I think I learned a huge amount about myself, and I learned a huge amount about my people, and I have to say, sitting here today, I've never been as proud of the people who I work with as I am today, for them getting through all of that and the things they did. And these are ordinary. These aren't, clearly these are the execs in it, but the brunt of this was taken at the people on the front line. And they were, they had their own problems at home. It was unbelievable. We sort of, as we're sort of getting used to it, we forget. We see the deaths every day. Oh, it's only 170. That's 1,000 a week. It is. We must never forget the magnitude of this, and we must never forget what people have gone through. And it's easy to do that, and we mustn't do that. And this. Inequality came to the fore in this, beyond anything else you've ever, where real inequality, and we all need to step up. My concern is that in a year's time, the new normal exists and we stop learning the lessons of what this really meant.
Yeah. People have short memories.
Absolutely.
Last question. Actually, I'll drop one in just before I go on to my last question. 3 words that would best describe you.
Rubbish, rubbish, rubbish. Or as my granddaughter would say, Vampire, you're rubbish at that. Yeah, that's my 6-year-old. Grandpa, you're rubbish at that. So they're the measure. They're my measure today.
For final question then. COVID's come and hopefully we're emerging out and people now see leadership in different ways. But if there were 3 tips for leaders, if somebody wants to become a leader, what sort of 3 tips would you give them finally to become great leaders? Because you like using that word great.
Oh, I think it's those 3 things that Ginny, who my CEO of CNARG, said to me. She said to me, this thing about vulnerability, kindness and compassion, that you have to have different skills. And I think these are the new skills that, not new skills, the skills that you have to enhance in the way, you have to lead with feeling, I think.
Allan, that's been fantastic.
Good.
You've been brilliant. Some really, really great stuff. And I really would encourage, if anyone hasn't had a chance, there's so many great bits in there. And obviously, for those who are looking to get the next business influencer, you're going to be featured in there as you are in this podcast. And
brilliant.
No, it's been wonderful. And you're right, I have been stalking you, but there's some really, really good. I love this one line. Again, it's your people thing, which is in football, when somebody scores a goal, people tend to forget that someone had to pass them the ball in the first place. In business, it is the same. Always reward, this is really great, the passer of the ball. And that's your quote.
And I made that up. And there was a friend of mine who had an advertising agency. And I tell the story of Jeff Hurst. Everybody remembers the hat trick he scored.
That's right.
If you see the last goal, you'll see that Germany are attacking and the ball goes in the box and Bobby Moore gets it just outside the penalty spot. And I know because I've heard the stories now, because I talked to Jack Charlton shouting to him, kick it into the stands. Gordon Banks is saying, kick it anywhere, Bobby. And what he does, he takes 4 steps and he passes that ball to Jeff Hurst. It's such a good pass, they all thought he was offside, and he wasn't. And Jeff Hurst goes, scores, gets a hat-trick. Nobody remembers Bobby Moore passing that ball. And so when I told this story, they went and they took the whole frame and they gave me a picture of that whole frame from him passing the ball to Jeff Hurst. And they put it, always remember to reward the passer of the ball. But that's the truth. But it's absolutely true. It's not easy to be the goal scorer, but everybody thinks about the goal scorer. But somebody does all the work. Yeah,
it's fascinating, and a business is part of the community, and the community relies also on the business. People rely on business, even if it's digital. Even if it's a digital world, you need the powers in the business to get the digital side right. Fantastic.
All
Cheers,
right,
Allan.
good to see you. Take care of yourself.
Thanks, mate.
Stay
Bye-bye.
safe.